Going again. Hey, welcome back, folks, to the r3.0 conference. We hope that you had a wonderful break, and we're enjoying the bioregional art flowing through during the break. We're now shifting into the second panel session, which is on relational bioregional knowledge commons, bridging practices and patterns across cultures. And Ralph and I are joined as co-facilitators by Andrea Farias, who is r3.0's research fellow focusing on bioregional knowledge commons. And we're also joined by four really great speakers, Warinqui Flores, Wendy McLean, Magenta Light, and Datu Lenelio Sancon. And we're going to kick things off with Andrea actually essentially wearing two hats. She's going to both co-facilitate along with Ralph and me, but also present essentially the background contextualizing for the other speakers. So she's going to present on the work that we here at r3.0 have been doing on bioregional knowledge commons, building off the work that she started independently on that front. And then we'll move into the four speakers as we did last time. So without further ado, Andrea, I'll pass it over to you to set the context.
All right. Thank you very much, Bill. And so excited to be here and share a bit of a background around the work that we've been doing on the bioregional knowledge commons. So I'll just share my screen here. Great. And can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can. Thanks, Andrea.
Perfect. Yes, so just to give a bit of a background, I think here we've all gotten an introduction on what bioregioning means, but just to give a background on why the knowledge specifically. So bioregions are sites of really rich experimentation. Through bioregioning, we're experimenting with land stewardship practices, with governance practices, with new financial and economic models, which are all very exciting things that we need in order to actually push forward this systemic transition. But knowledge is often fragmented. That knowledge is held in informal networks within stewards themselves, which is incredible, but we also want to harness that knowledge in order for other bioregional organizers in other places to be able to access that knowledge and actually be able to move forward in a better way, whatever that means to them. So the question is, how do we connect what we know without flattening where it comes from, without just making it standardized? And so this is where the bioregional knowledge commons came from, the idea to create a knowledge commons or a shared community knowledge infrastructure that is community owned and governed by the people who are actually using that knowledge and creating that knowledge. So not just a database, but include a kind of infrastructure, social infrastructure that includes rules, cultural practices, and governance. And we're thinking about it in two layers. So bioregional organizers might be creating knowledge commons in their own bioregions, in their own place. That might be place specific. It might be documenting knowledge around local ecology or cultural practices. That we're thinking about also the meta-knowledge commons. So how do we surface those patterns of organizing that are emerging from different bioregions and be able to communicate them across contexts for that shared learning to occur? And the way that we are thinking of doing this, or that has emerged, is through thinking about what commons, a pattern language of the commons, or of bioregioning. So this idea is inspired by Bollier and Helfrich, their own Patterns of Commoning book. And essentially a pattern identifies recurring practices across different bioregions and reveals essentially ideas that can be shared, context-neutral patterns that can be shared about bioregions, across bioregions. So that are able to kind of communicate a way or an approach to organizing that might be relevant in other places as well. So they let us translate patterns of organizing from one place to another without making them, without kind of the need for exact replication or standardization, which this kind of flexibility for adapting to a local context. And through our work, these are some of the considerations that have emerged, and what kind of requirements we would need to create this knowledge common. So we want to include lots of different ways of knowing, lots of different ontologies, and not just Western knowledge, but indigenous knowledge, not just human knowledge, but also multiple species, multiple languages, and think about kind of the relational elements. So not just databases, but how do we think about how knowledge flows between people, or different ways of accessing it. Is it through a wiki? If it's through a map, is it through stories? Is it through some other kind of communication? We're thinking about how do we make the tech, if there is tech or where there is tech, interoperable, federated, low maintenance, so lots of people can use it. And in terms of governance, we're thinking, how do we create local autonomy, shared stewardship, and respect knowledge sovereignty of the people actually creating and stewarding that knowledge? And so this process emerged from some foundational research I did between last year and early this year. That's documented in a paper called Bioregional Knowledge Commons, a meta perspective, which looked at different organizations within the bioregional movement and looking at how they're kind of communicating and storing knowledge now, and how might that be improved. And from this emerged a participatory process through a community of inquiry and practice with over 50 different people from across the movement. So this community of inquiry and practices is focusing on documenting practices and surfacing patterns of looking at, well, what do we actually need to have in this knowledge commons? Who will be responsible for stewarding it? And actually kind of surfacing those questions and trying to, starting to answer them, or seeing where the next steps might be in order to answer those questions. I've also been building a database of different organizations, initiatives within the bioregional movement, and from that starting to surface initial patterns. So it's kind of a site for experimentation on how we might actually document bioregional practices and surface these patterns. And what is next for us? So within the Bioregional Knowledge Commons community of inquiry and practice, we are looking at starting to map how we might create this knowledge commons, how we might start to document these practices, and what the best methods might be to identify these emergent patterns without kind of imposing too much of our own ideas on it, making it useful for bioregional organizers themselves that are the ones that are going to use this knowledge commons and participate in creating this knowledge. And so we're thinking about how do we start to create this knowledge commons? How do we govern this knowledge commons? And how do we bring the right people together to actually create an ecosystem of knowledge? So that's it for me. Thank you very much. And I'll pass it back to Bill.
Thank you so much, Andrea. That's really helpful to set the foundation for this session from the work that we at r3.0 are doing to pull together a community of inquiry and practice. We're still in the early stages of that, but many of those who will be presenting are participating in that community of inquiry and practice. So we're really excited for this particular group of folks. We're going to start off with Warren Flores, who will provide us with a look into the research that he is doing, in particular, biocultural research for an Indigenous Knowledge Commons perspective. So, Warren, over to you first.
Napanalamu, morning, afternoon, evening. Great to see everybody. Let me just find my presentation. So do please let me know if you can see it.
We can see it, and it's in regular mode. So just shifting the presentation mode.
Yeah. Okay.
There.
Presentation mode was.
It's trying to.
Okay.
It's quivering.
Just give it 1 second and see if will actually work.
There we go.
Is this in presentation or is in?
It's in presentation mode now.
All right. Okay. So I will put in a clock. I got about 12 minutes, right? So let me just get going this. So I am a descent and also a citizen of the Cara, Andean and Quechua, Andean and Amazonian nations in Ecuador, Colombia, and Peru. Currently, I am the founder of Keynote, Indigenous R&D. I'm also doing my PhD at University of Arizona. So this is going to be a little bit oversight of what we're developing in the territory of the Cara and the Quechua peoples of Ecuador, primarily, if we want to be in the geographic position. So just a little bit, I think some of the things that we're really looking into, the communities, we are really basing a lot of our science or the way that we are trying to do based in our ontology, ways of knowing and not knowing. So we really center a lot of our knowledge creation in summa causa, in Spanish, that roughly has a semantic meaning of when vivir, and also in English will have a semantic meaning of good life. So we can think about this as a living systems. So if we apply this into foundational relational science, we start seeing 4 little key elements that emerges continuously in how we think about our sciences and the creation of knowledge. We are in continuously formation of relationality, of relationship. And this is in a context of all beings. In all beings, often we think about mostly in living things like plants, animals, but for our relationality is more with the non-living elements, mountains, rivers, fire, soil, and all the big elements that makes life possible. So relationality is a key element to us. Then we really think about in our knowledge creation is the reciprocal accountability, meaning really to whom we are accountable to when we are creating knowledge and who this knowledge is emerging from. So when we think about that, we're learning actually from nature, or we are creating solutions from nature, we are thinking about how do we offer this reciprocal responsibility to maintain the ecosystems alive. And that has created a more so of a culture-based solution, our local understanding of the natural landscape and how that influence our cultural evolution across generations and onwards. Connectivity, we really are trying to remembering a lot of our connection to our own selves, human to human, but also to the place where we believe. And nonetheless, we continuously see this word that we use often either is incorporation, integration, or weaving knowledges. For us, is more so of complementarity. We're looking into complements of opposite forces. So we're learning from both systems, from indigenous knowledge creation, but also from non-indigenous knowledge creations and everything else that we can learn from the patterns of life. So from the Kara Kichwa standing, knowledge is not owned. It is a steward through relationship for the benefit of all life. So that is a key element of how we integrate knowledge in our creation, and those four things really harnesses summa causa in knowledge creation. So if we think about this in a time context, in red we see the current realities that we continuously envision when we are trying to participate externally. So we have knowledge extraction, we have communities that are excluded from governance of the knowledge, meaning how knowledge is used, when it's used, how it is aggregated, disaggregated. And then, of course, many times the biocultural heritage is commodified for profit without any community participation. And most of the times we see our territories, as I mentioned in my introduction, I belong to this region between Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, but geopolitically, we are not allowed to commute across these regions. So those things fragments in how we create knowledge and exchange the knowledge in our own bioregions. So our response to this is more so trying to create a bioculture regionality system. And in here, I use bioculture to make a sense that we are making place, as a place making of people's habitat and the mindset of identity and belonging to the place that we call home. So bioculture in here is this nature-culture relationship that needs to emerge. And of course, when we're looking into our responses to exclusion from decision-making, we are working really hard to look into indigenous-led knowledge sovereignty, meaning who generates knowledge, how knowledge is generated, if it is research, who is asking the research question, and how findings are being defined and when it's implemented. And we're also looking hardly into community control data governance. And this is primarily important to how we are looking into data sovereignty. A minute ago in the introduction, we were talking about this. How do we bring the relational bioregional knowledge commons? So that means that we need to bring our data into these ecosystems. So, but how we are to govern the data and how this data that we are bringing will help the communities to govern these elements. And it is in here where we start thinking about more so in the bioculture relationship boundaries based in cultural forms of law. And this is primarily trying to bring some of the existing informal governing systems that exist between indigenous communities, local communities, and the government, and that has existed for many, many generations. So bringing the cultural forms into law is going to help us create this relationship that is being broken. And then we think about, again, reciprocal accountability when we are seeing this benefit sharing agreements, and who defines these benefit sharing agreements, and how do we implement those benefit sharing agreements. So we are trying to create this counter methodology to the traditional way of understanding one way of creating solutions. So if we think about biocultural regional architecture, I will put it just in 4 dimensions to help us understand its place. Nested bioregions, peoples, indigenous people, or local communities that are polycentric to the governance systems with the more than human agency. Many of our countries or of indigenous communities in Latin America has either bring up the rights of nature into their nation state constitution, or they are start building their own declarations for nature, for the rights of nature. So Ecuador has 2 things, has rights of nature in their constitution, but also many communities like the Sarayaco community has created the Declaration of the Living Forest that also gives the exercise of more than human agency. Similarly, Bolivia has bring up into their own constitution rights of nature in here. So then when we think about this, we need to be thinking about purpose. You know, in Summa Causa, we think about the duty of care for collective well-being across our heritage, our present, and our future generations. Planet, we continuously looking how we want to participate into the external needs of the planet while maintaining our autonomy into our own territories. So to do this really in practice, we need to start thinking about more so indigenous data sovereignty in the practical sense. So internationally, we have guiding principles like the care principles of collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics. And in the biocultural regionality space, is there at least in Latin America, there is the emerging principles of the Caraquichua peoples that is trying to implement self-determination, autonomy, collective authority, and communal governance, collective deliberation, knowledge confidentiality. This is where we are start thinking about how do we create these agreements between these larger ecosystems that wants to bring our knowledge and systems to understand better what is taking place in the larger landscape. And then when we think about Summa Causa, in here we are start moving a little bit away from the contemporary ethics into bringing biocultural ethics. And this is more so basing ourselves in the indigenous ethical frameworks to think about nature has agency in what we're trying to do. At least in many communities and also in Latin America, we have seen this more and more so. And this is an emerging field in the rights of nature. So by exploring the biocultural ethics, we bring these entities that has not participated previously in decision making, and all of that should be into our work, community resilience. So when we think about sharing some of these at the bioregional knowledge commons architecture, we see 3 spaces that needs to exist in order for us to really engage with the community: is the physical space, the digital platform, and the exchange networks. Physical space, we are more so seeing how do we decolonize education, and many of you in here in this panel probably are either doing this or looking into decolonizing education itself or repurposing education. So in community learning centers, we see a key element, but more so we are seeing land reunion. And land reunion for us is what most in North America will think about like a land back or land return. For us, it's more like a land reunion because many of our generations, we have been so disconnected from our lands that we need to relearn, we need to remember how to interact with those landscapes. So it's a reunion that we are taking place, and this is our living libraries in the territories that we exist. Digital spaces, we are more so seeing the importance of indigenous control databases where we can implement our own metadata that serves our community and it can be transferred. Once again, when we think about exchanging networks, we are really looking into the inter-bioregional learning journeys, but also infrastructure transfer protocols. This is finance, technology, and legal infrastructures that, in order to really move from centralized to decentralized way of collaboration, is a way of transferring some of these architectures or infrastructure to the regional level. And then, of course, many of these we have continuously look is the reciprocal, the lack of accountability and resource development and innovation. So we need to repurpose those things into a reciprocal accountability and emerge out of those systems. So for us, when we think about this in a practical sense for a marketplace, if we were to participate in the marketplace, we start looking into really a rights-based approach in participation. The current model, we are seeing the external actors capture a lot of the value, and many of you, as I follow, some of you in LinkedIn, we talk about a lot of the carbon cowboys or the environmental market unicorns that we don't know where it is, but the value is being captured. Knowledge is synthesized, knowledge systems and compensated or uncredited, meaning there is a lack of provenance, data provenance. Where is this knowledge coming from? We are talking about indigenous knowledge systems, but we do not know which community comes from, who created it, how it was created. And then, of course, we are seeing more so that communities provide ecosystem services. And many we discuss, indigenous territories holds the highest biodiversity in here. So if we were to move into a bioculture regionality systems model, we start seeing a more community participation. We start seeing data contracts and licenses, ethical benefit sharing, and of course, indigenous people and nature as knowledge rights holders, which is a key element in transitioning to how we credit and value knowledge creation. So,
Warren, you're just a little bit over. So if you could wrap up in the next little bit, that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm right there. So in constitutional framings that we are looking is the legal innovation and governance transformation. So if we look into adding the existing already legal systems and create a transformation, that will help participation of indigenous communities into these ecosystems. So this is our call into transformative partnership where we create a pre-informed consent, community control, but also we start seeing a vision into how do we create these elements into our existing landscape. And with that, I appreciate your attention. And this is my last word.
Thank you so much, Maureen. I'll invite folks to continue as we've been doing of letting that sink in for a moment. Community controlled data, reciprocal accountability, knowledge sovereignty, data and knowledge provenance. Let these ideas sink in. As we shift over to Wendy McLean, who is joining us to share about the Omni Mapping Initiative that she is co-stewarding with Vincent, Arena, and others, and in particular doing that through the Catalyst platform and others. So Wendy, over to you next.
Thank you so much, Bill and Ralph and r3.0 for having this conference and for hosting us. You can see my screen, yes?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. I'll be sharing a bit about Omni Mapping Project, as Bill just mentioned, and what we're doing to support the creation of the Bioregional Knowledge Commons. I really appreciate what Warren just shared, and so to jump off of that, really where Omni Mapping sits is really in support to the digital platforms and exchange networks. I also want to let you know that at the end of the presentation, I'll provide a QR code, which will lead you to all the resources I mentioned today, including a PDF of this presentation. So for those who like to take screenshots and stuff, you'll have that at your fingertips. I want to start with a bit of context from our perspective. The mapping side of Omni refers to any effort to connect data and present it in visual form. In general, mapping helps us assess, understand, and navigate toward a better future together. The challenge, as Andrea also mentioned, is that even though there's abundant bioregional knowledge, it's fragmented and trapped in silos. Vital resources are scattered across maps, organizations, and platforms. Countless hours are wasted rebuilding tools and reinventing solutions instead of connecting. Our goal is to bridge across those gaps, weaving worldviews, expertise, and tools into shared practice, and silos into more effective interconnected systems, thereby revealing patterns, insights, and solutions that collectively make up a knowledge repository communities can tailor to their local needs. We are OmniMapping. Our team includes Vincent, our chief architect, myself, the project director, and Steve, our technology partner and advisor. OmniMapping is an overlapping mapping network infrastructure. Along with the support of our fiscal sponsor, Buckminster Fuller Institute, our mission is to help organizations create better and more interoperable maps and use them to enable collaboration within and across organizations working on shared goals. Here's a bit about our unique approach. In addition to geographical maps that help us understand and navigate, people also use maps like directories, lists of resources, solution libraries, and webs of systems and networks. Typical mapping efforts result in distinct maps designed for specific purposes using different tools with incompatible and siloed data. The OmniMapping team takes a bird's eye view, providing the structure that maps across the field. This enables information to connect across maps of different types, scales, and networks, and creates interoperability across platforms too. Systems speak to each other rather than duplicate silos. Synergies and opportunities previously hidden are revealed. Over the years, we've worked on hundreds of maps with various organizations focused on a variety of goals. We discovered a pattern in how people create maps. There was a repeatable process of 6 steps in the creation of every map, and most mapping initiatives get stuck in similar spots, like having to return to curation because critical data is missing, like privacy settings or location data, both particularly important in creating the commons. Realizing only once people start interacting with the map that it needed to be organized and structured differently to serve the end users. Missing critical metrics needed to track success so stakeholders are informed. Often these hurdles are high enough that mapping projects come to a halt without reaching the original goals. So now we offer tools for community leaders to tailor the process in advance of their mapping efforts to better meet their needs. OmniMapping has now published free mapping readiness checklist and a free assessment template in Miro. Both offer a structured but lightweight process to guide a group through a series of questions about the map's purpose, boundaries, data sources, scope, and governance. Answering together builds a shared commitment, accelerates progress, and unlocks the greatest potential in their mapping efforts. Because the resulting maps are prepared to meet community needs while also unlocking knowledge that can be shared with trusted partners and even the commons. In this way, OmniMapping is poised to assist in elevating data and creating a path to the commons. First, we must create the bridges. Our approach combines ecosystem mapping with systems dynamics to bridge 3 distinct layers. Here's what that looks like. First, we build up the local mapping layer. Each community that uses OmniMapping protocols generates maps that are unique to local contexts, while at the same time, the OmniMapping standards still allow information to be shared with other communities. Enter Catalyst. As our platform partner, Catalyst is a natural extension of Omni. It makes the OmniMapping protocols and standards come alive through its visualizations. It also provides meaningful space where communities can add a private layer on top of existing shared data. People can add personal notes, build new connections, and map their own ecosystem however they like. So far, in this local mapping layer, Catalyst contains hundreds of community maps tailored to their specific goals, featuring meaningful interconnections within and across their own networks. Next, Omni looks to build up the global layer to make the shared digital knowledge commons more robust. It must include base maps from publicly accessible data, interconnected frameworks, links back to content sources, the ability to track provenance, a holistic perspective of the wider system and of issues that transcend local boundaries. This layer is also well underway in Catalyst. It already hosts over 20,000 public objects, over 230 framework sets available for everyone to use, and over 8,500 tags. With those first two layers in place, Omni mapping really begins to shine because now it adds new bridges, the third and final interstitial layer. We all know that local conditions are informed by global trends and that global strategies are continually refined through local experience and outcomes. So Omni mapping is designed to interconnect the layers in ways that are meaningful and relevant. This interstitial layer provides an enhanced mycelial type data network, creating bridges across silos and bringing forward our collective relational knowledge of rich patterns in a way that everyone can see. In Catalyst, we've already witnessed how mapping unlocks enhanced knowledge sharing. Creating this robust interstitial layer elevates possibilities we're only just beginning to witness. Stakeholders can compare strategies across bioregions, share best practices, and coordinate efforts more effectively on the ground, and then facilitate any detailed local analyses and insights back into the global dashboards for everyone to benefit. All three layers bridged together give us a powerful result. Community-generated maps, stewarded and interconnected with shared framework sets and data commons. We finally can share our knowledge into a living knowledge commons that is both globally informed and locally grounded, building community resilience over time. So what does this mean for you and me in our daily work and in our communities? Let's see what Omni mapping looks like in action. First, the layers weave themselves back together seamlessly. Work is continually supported by the technology as we assess, understand, and navigate together. With Omni mapping involvement, the positive impact can be easily seen in a handful of use cases. Seaworthy Collective had limited ability to scale. Omni helped by mapping the network with systemized processes to better navigate the data. The organization doubled support for startups, accelerated impact in areas like coral reef restoration, and the startups raised over 20 million. The South Florida Climate Ready Tech Hub lacked critical understanding of their ecosystem that hindered funding. Omni mapping helped by discovering critical data was missing. Once location and strength of connection was gathered, they could finally understand the gaps, decide to increase the diversity, and visualize personal interconnections in their network so funding could flow. The Social Employment Fund lacked data visibility and tools to assess child and learner well-being. Omni interconnected their organizational networks with their systems maps to uncover insights and alignment opportunities. The impact was felt by thousands of students. Collaborative interventions led to vision care, literacy packs, food and engagement, and additional funding. Making better maps is the key to understanding hidden potential, assessing opportunities for effective collaborations, and navigating toward more meaningful impacts. So what's next for Omni mapping? We are currently seeking funding to continue work with our collaborators and partners in building up the knowledge commons. Here's our plan. First, we'll further development and then push the frameworks commons, publish the frameworks commons, read that wrong. Enhancing the framework sets that are already in Catalyst. Then we'll work with partner platforms to integrate and test the framework commons, ensuring we're meeting the needs of individuals and communities. We'll convene a mapping cohort to review data offered up for the commons by local communities. The cohort will then curate, evaluate, and approve the data to be part of the commons. Here, Catalyst serves as a testing ground, supporting the process of converting its 20,000 public objects into quality information to be shared for everyone's benefit. This scale and scope of work has the added goal of standardizing the process for creating a knowledge commons with protocols for agency, sovereignty, and provenance. Then a redesign of the data commons will be needed to create new visualizations that accommodate the new interconnected data. And finally, we will share all the learnings, frameworks, commons, databases, curation standards for the public good, where other platforms and tools can benefit from the standards and protocols, making it far easier to contribute even more to the commons. Our next use case is emerging now. We're currently building relationship with new partners, including an intertribal association. Together, we aim to create more nuance in our infrastructure for supporting sovereignty and sharing capacity, honoring how tradition can work alongside innovation, and how local knowledge can be woven with global insights, all in the right balance. Omnimapping, along with Catalyst, is poised to continue weaving this tapestry of a living knowledge commons. We are still listening and learning, evolving our development of tech to meet the needs of bioregional movement. To summarize, here's what we're offering in service to the bioregions: processes to make better maps, protocols for sharing across silos, standards to establish best practices for optimal data reuse. All stewarded across the local, global, and interstitial layers, so we can finally expand our capacity for building a shared dynamic living knowledge commons. Together, we're weaving living, interconnected knowledge systems while preserving context, honoring sovereignty, and enabling collaboration across scales. Thank you. For all the free tools, this is the QR code where you can get more resources, and I'll also put the link in chat.
Thank you so much, Wendy.
Yeah.
You can leave that up for a moment, and folks might be able to just take a screenshot of that. As you mentioned, you're going to share that. We also will be sharing presentations, so this will remain accessible, but that's future. Let's, for now, just again, take a moment to let that sink in. And I hope that folks like me are starting to feel the interconnectedness between these sessions. Wendy spoke of agency, sovereignty, provenance. We've already had these ideas introduced, and in particular, this interstitial layer between the global and local maps is, I found, particularly useful in terms of understanding the role that omnimapping can play. So I'll be quiet for a moment and let that sink in for you all. So from omnimapping, we're going to shift to the Bloom network. And from Bloom, we're going to transition to a specific Bloom member. So you'll get a view of both a broad platform for bioregional organizing and a particular instance of that. The former is going to come from Magenta Light, who's a co-founder of the Bloom network. And following her will be a Bloom, as they call them, Datu Lanelio Sancoin. So Magenta, if you could go off mute and start sharing your screen, and over to you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Magenta. Let's see. Are you able to see the slides?
We can.
All right. So I'm going to be sharing about Bloom Network today and the incredible community that is federating through this. And you're welcome to join or collaborate if any of this sounds fun to you. And so I'll go through what is Bloom, a couple of case studies from local Bloom hubs, and how we incentivize knowledge sharing, as well as the kind of living relational process that is there, almost more so than the tech often. We'll talk about interoperability with other systems. And lastly, I'll focus on the Indigenous rewards pool. And yeah, we're generally geared up so more people can find, participate in, and appropriately replicate the innovations that are coming out of grassroots community-led development. So by way of what Bloom is, we're the world's first regenerative social media cooperative. We're transforming social media from extractive attention harvesting into a platform that funds real-world community action. It is community governed and designed to be a federated co-op, kind of like Mondragon, if you're familiar with that. Each of the local and bioregional hubs co-owns, co-governs, co-designs everything on the platform. Yeah, just the platform in a nutshell. So you know, we have local media feeds. Here's an example of one of them, where you can find, you know, what's going on in your local community, find actions you can participate in, upcoming events. And we do grants distribution based on knowledge documentation. I'll tell you more about that later. And lastly, we have a goods and services exchange that is designed to bootstrap bioregional economies. So really the whole thing flips extractive social networks on their heads to fund and make visible the on-the-ground, place-based, community-led development that's like way cheaper, way more cost-effective, and much more equitable with like healthier, decentralized governance structures. So just to let you know, we're not new. We have been around. The local chapters formed in 2008 through Bloom, and we're now entering into the growth phase. So we have the full stack social network. There's about 30,000 members on the ground and about 35 local chapters in 15 countries right now. The first case study here is Long Beach Fresh. They're a local food movement building community in Long Beach, California. They have a bunch of how-to templates on Bloom, which you can check out. That's one type of content that people can create on Bloom. So how to start a crop swap, or how to start a community garden, or a commercial food project. They also have local food policy that they've developed that can, you know, a lot of these kinds of templates that are up on Bloom can save folks, you know, 10 years of trial and error. So that's one thing folks are sharing. So yeah, they're doing local food movement market building. They bring together hundreds of local food businesses, farms, restaurants, food trucks, community crop swaps, local food policy. There's like 10,000 people at their annual festival. So one thing unique about Bloom is the way we collaborate with the local groups. So we have a campaign that we really want to run to scale up local and bioregional food sovereignty in more places because we're extremely strong in that area. And our current blocker is, one of the leaders with Long Beach Fresh, who is a communications professor there, we would really like to hire him to lead that project. So our current blocker is just money to hire their team to run it. But that's an example where we have like talent on the ground that has things really far developed. And then together we can help resource more communities to learn and accelerate climate adaptation and repair, basically, through like economic empowerment, which hopefully that becomes clear to you as I'm sharing through this. The next slide here is Broadfield Enterprises Uganda. They're freaking amazing. They do large-scale commercial permaculture agroforestry. They plant 500 indigenous plant species amidst 4 export crops. They are big on food and economic sovereignty in Africa. Their methods repair microclimates, prevent flooding, and they joined Bloom because they want to practice more aspects of regeneration, such as transformative justice, more layers of economic power building, and so forth. They're really curious about learning about cryptocurrency. They have about a 3,000 farm cooperative. They own their own distribution facility in the EU, and that's open to any Bloom chapters who produce food products in a permaculture way. So that's another example of collaboration, like having a facility, owning our own. We're starting to own our own supply chains and do it really peer-to-peer, cut out any middlemen who are taking a percentage of the profit. 40% of the profits from that distribution go into their Ugandan team's Tropiculture Permaculture Institute of Africa, which trains African farmers to use permaculture methods for food, economy, justice, and liberations. They're going to visit us in the US in November. We're going to host a few workshops, I think, in Vermont and New Hampshire. Very exciting. And they contribute a lot to the business development of Bloom Network, which a lot of the local Bloom leaders do. Like they see that this is a living global interconnected system, and they want to help each other peer-to-peer as well as really transform the supply chains of where people and companies are sourcing their products so that the whole thing is regenerative and more community owned and community benefiting. So yeah, there's so many inspiring case studies. I could talk about them for like hours, each one of them. And I think there's a couple more local Blooms on the call too, which is very exciting, the local leaders. I joined Bloom because I saw the impact these people were having for like having no money. And I was like, all right, if I can give these people a sustainable business model, it's game over, bad guys. So I dropped everything to like figure that out. We had to invent some shit. So this is what we invented. So this is a way to reward people who are doing community-led development on the ground. It's by and large invisible, receive no funding because it's decentralized, collaborative. These people, it's like almost structurally incompatible with centralized finance. And so Bloom is like this docking system so that we can make it legible enough to intake funds from that system and then pour them into this more decentralized, community-led, value-driven network. So what happens is people document the actions that they're doing in their local communities. They're sharing local plants knowledge, traditional building, watershed care, they're forming relationships. And so anyone who participated in the action in their community can document it about it on Bloom. We guide them to learning how to document it, like talk about their impacts or like beneficial outcomes. And then it's also a way to storytell, share peer knowledge with each other. It kind of serves multiple functions. And then it makes this visible. Again, this stuff is invisible in mainstream media because it doesn't make outside people money and it doesn't drive conflict. And so Bloom is a social network that aggregates and lifts up the empowering media, like, come do this in your community, celebrate the people who are doing this. Like, we're not disempowered. Like, we have the solutions we need, just like come together and do them. And we try to resource people toward mobilizing that. Anyway, so they then in that report include who participated in the action, if they're members of Bloom Co-op. And then we distribute our grants pool. So say we have $15,000 in one quarter, proportional to the labor hours that are documented. And we do that in a token called USDC, which is a stable coin. They can easily swap that into their country's currency. And this stuff is fast. It takes like 5 seconds, costs less than $5 to send, say, $1 million to 10,000 people anywhere in the world. It costs, per transaction, like 0.00001 cent to send money that way. So it's very efficient. Like, if we're talking about scale to address climate issues, like, this is built to, like, let's get the money to the people who are able to do the most cost-effective, rapid solutions. And this is really like what the plant medicines have really instructed me and a lot of us to create this kind of infrastructure together. We also issue them a cooperative patronage token, again, utilizing the benefits of the smart contracts and cryptocurrency space. I know those words are all like weird to most people, but we issue them flow or flowers at 30 flowers per hour to illustrate what if we were each making $30 USD per hour for this labor we're mostly doing for free because we need to survive. Then they can use that in a goods and services exchange. So say I have 500 flow from participating in a watershed repair action. I really need a massage. I can't really afford one. I go to the flow exchange. Oh, I can get a massage. I can get an organic food CSA subscription. I can get babysitting. Woohoo! So it's a way to share our surplus, but that is also a business discovery mechanism. And so I mention that just because it's like this whole system way to celebrate the knowledge producers in an open, very user-friendly, almost Facebook-like interface, and then route capital to them to then do the economic transformation and economic sovereignty that is at the root of addressing the climate crisis from our perspective. We have a map, like I said, really excited to meet Wendy and like learn more about Catalyst because yeah, I really agree. There's so much we can do as we interoperate our maps and like visualize, what does it look like to install, I don't know, water absorption per acre in this area? How much does it cost? How much would that mitigate flooding risk? There's so many things you can use it for. So yeah, we have a map so you can explore local projects, get involved, go visit them. It interoperates with Treasury Index, which is a spatial computing platform that does that kind of fancy visualization of like, what if we roll out green roofs across X surface area in a city. So that's geared for like sustainable development professionals. We also integrate on the impact side our impact reports. Also, they automatically post to a Web3 reporting system that is used for grant programs like Gitcoin, etc. And so that reduces the reporting burden on local organizers. Yeah, and we try to orient our map around regenerative economy, and it's almost like a solidarity economy map. So yeah, that's almost at the end here. Just in summary, Bloom is a social network that is bioregionally governed. We incentivize knowledge sharing, bootstrap bioregional economies, and then interoperate across platforms to maximize mutually beneficial scaling. I just finished like our keywords strategy for really rocking our marketing stuff. So how we juxtapose different niche micro movements to collaborate and learn from one another, which is kind of what our whole brand is architected around. Because of the existing media network, it uses like hyper-specific targeting to do behavior conversion. So we're like, all right, let's back out of that and rewire interconnections so that these communities can directly peer-to-peer share resources with each other without an extractive middleman platform. Datu Lanelio, who's going to speak next, this is their local Bloom page. Really encourage you to check out his writing. It's incredibly beautiful. He's sharing about how their tribe is approaching recovering food sovereignty, reforestation, defending their territory from development risks. And I cried when I saw his platform or his profile on Bloom Network. He's just such a beautiful person. I think he described himself as a sacred cave protector. And he mentioned bats. Yeah, just, and to close, this is Lanelio's idea. And so how I described to you how our rewards pool works, he really wants us to create an Indigenous specific rewards pool so that I think, I don't know what the stats are. Something like NGOs take 98% of climate funds, and there's so many pass-through fees. Like the money that makes it to Indigenous leadership is like shockingly nonsensically small. Like these are the people who understand how to maintain biodiversity, and like what they do with the resources they have is so much more effective, and like their leadership should be celebrated and protected. And so we'd really love to make an Indigenous specific rewards pool so that funds can come into that mechanism I described and then distributed directly to Indigenous leaders and communities in the way that they govern in their own process, with this like retroactive funding I described. So they're not having to do upfront grant applications and like really bureaucratic reporting. It's like, no, they storytell about what it is. Maybe they're using their own data system and they're like, we'll tell you a little bit here and then, you know, direct you over here where we fully own our IP and everything. Anyway, we'd really love an Indigenous rewards pool to happen, or looking for someone to seed that to celebrate and uplift and support the leadership of Indigenous communities around the world. That's Bloom Network in a nutshell. You're welcome to join it. You're welcome to contact me at magenta@bloomnetwork.earth. You know, go check it out, bloomnetwork.earth. I think the community media feed is where you'll find the live feed of all the posts. There's probably like 600 impact reports in there that are documenting the practices and actions that people are doing on the ground. So that's it from my side.
Thank you, Magenta. And we can see the applause coming up the screen. That's the way that we do it here. And I just want to invite you all to let some of this sink in from Mage. My favorite moment was game over bad guys. But I also really appreciate the explanation of how to compensate on the ground practitioners, interoperability with other platforms. And you had just presented to the Northeast Woodlands Bioregioning Collective that the impact reports and the fact that those can auto-post onto Web3 platforms or instances is really cool. So thank you. I'll pause for a moment and let that sink in for everyone. And Mage, I may actually ask you, I believe that Datu Lanelio is not with us. Lanelio, if you are present, if you could just go off mute and let us know, but we believe he's not here. Which may be a similar dynamic. I know that his internet connectivity in the Philippines has been spotty in the past. So assuming that that's the case, Mage, I might ask you to just for a moment or two come back on the line and maybe share a little bit about their work from what is represented on the Bloom Network website. I know you can't speak for him or them, but maybe just speak through what's visible on Bloom.
Sure, I could do that. We could probably also link to his presentation in the chat so folks can read that after. It's a really beautiful description of where their tribe is coming from with their and sharing of their knowledge practices. One other suggestion, there are 2 local blooms on the call. Would you rather have me kind of walk through a little bit of the Higanon's page, or would you rather hear from a local Bloom leader directly?
Maybe what we'll do is, reconnect with Lanelio at a future point. We'll certainly share the presentation that we've already got on hand. But yeah, if there are blooms that are here that could speak to this and sort of fulfill our intention was to have a specific bloom represented. So yeah, Mage, if you could just invite one or two to just share briefly, maybe 5 minutes, and then we'll get into the dialogue.
Yeah, I think I saw Danny Bell as well as Trisha, Spencer, and Iris.
Danny Bell, if you'd like, maybe you could start and then we could weave in our more recent interactions around Bloom and around flows, if you'd like.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. I think I can start by sharing some of the larger context of Bloom and how it's supported us in Costa Rica after working with it up in Cascadia on that bioregional scale. One of the things of being part of Bloom on this entire journey has, we have the Diamante bloom down in our Brunca bioregion now. But the beginnings of Bloom, Magenta went into a lot of where we're at now with the economic parts of it. But the beautiful part is there's also a whole process of guiding an individual organizer or a small group of people that would like to start a local Bloom and start capitalizing and benefiting and circulating economic benefit in these complementary ways by following the pathway that's been designed and laid out at Bloom Network Earth for how to bring together people in small gatherings first and use tools to build up your network. Our Bloom in the Diamante Valley, I think since we started doing the rewards, we've had 25 different individuals who have been participating and doing actions for a long time already, but with the implementation of this system, this 20-some individuals can participate in the impact reporting and receive these flow tokens and start exchanging not only between our own members in our small region of the larger bioregion, but also across blooms. So as we've been able to build up awareness, understanding, hold workshops to educate people on how to sign up, how to report the actions, how to organize and participate in actions, and then tell the impact. Now we're actually at a place where we're able to exchange between our blooms. And maybe at this point, I'll hand it over to Tricia to tell you about how we've actually done that recently.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Danny. And I think actually I want to go back and say, before this recent exchange for flow, just listening to both you and Magenta speak and recognizing that it was through the mentorship of both of you that we as an analog project down here on the Osa Peninsula were able to even imagine tapping into a Web3 resource and tapping into a digital platform that was actually like recognizing and holding up the analog community that we are working with and engaged in, and helping us to tailor the digital needs with the analog needs. And so our local bloom has been, really stewarded by both Magenta in the technical aspects, and then by Danny just in the practical aspects of how to activate a bloom locally. And we've been doing it really slowly. So Edith and Spence, who are here with me right now, they were our first two other local bloom members besides myself. And then we've been expanding out into our farmer community and into the community that Danny and Magenta were talking about, and really all of us are talking about. It's the weavers on the ground that have been holding communities for decades, for generations, and how do we really recognize the value of what they are doing, make that visible into the world of digital, which is really into the world of finance, to be able to have that reciprocity coming back into community. And so I don't know where we are on time, but one thing related to reciprocity, Magenta spoke about it related to the flows, which is the complementary currency that's happening within Bloom. And just back in August, here on the OSA through Los Higuerones, which is our local bioregional learning center, we were able to host an immersion where Danny was able to come down, Travis, who's also here, who's from Bloom, and Jason, who's also part of our Brunca bioregion, but representing the mountains up in Chirripó. They were able to come down and participate in a 3-day design immersion that we were hosting. And because Danny and Travis were both members of a partner Bloom, we were able to flow the flows that they received for the work that they were doing into our treasury here at Los Higuerones and increase our flow as a way of really showing the circularity that happens when we create the circularity. It's amazing just the level of multiplicity and generosity that comes forward. So I think that's all I wanted to add, Danny, and if there's anything that you wanted to bring in reflection on that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, the multi-layered reward system is really powerful. So those of us in the Diamante Valley who had been receiving rewards for past work, we were able to bring our USDC and actually spend it at the feria with the farmers down at the OSA, in addition to flowing the flow tokens between each other in recognition of our support. And I think the final note I want to add is I know there's quite a few people on this call from the Cascadia bioregion, and I was the organizer for the Bloom Cascadia back 10 years ago. So if anyone from Cascadia is looking to start a Bloom there, I have lists of contacts and all kinds of information to share.
Thank you so much, Danny, and I'm sorry, Tricia. Thank you so much for sharing that and sort of filling the gap that we had. The intention was to get a greater sense of how things work on the ground. Skeeter, thank you for offering to speak to Datu Lanelio from your personal knowledge. I think what we'll do is we'll try to reconnect with him and record his presentation, and we'll try to coordinate with you, and maybe we could have you tie into how to your knowledge of his work as well. So if that, okay, cool. Looks like that will work. So thank you to both our formal presenters and our impromptu presenters. We're going to open things up to a dialogue now, and we're going to start with a first question that came in. Actually, two questions came in from Carlos Alberto Solona Ortiz from Los Angeles in Florida right now. His first question was for Andrea. So we'll start there, and we'll sort of go in the order of the sessions. So the question was, are there real or sensed examples of emergent / meta patterns from the Knowledge Commons work? So I'll just leave it at that for now, and then pose a second question from him to Warren next.
Are there any patterns emerging? Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of different patterns that we can see already from the, at least through my work, from the initiatives that I've documented. So it's hard to, so maybe I'll just kind of mention a couple that are particularly interesting for me. I think one really fascinating one is just how the use of spirituality, culture, and art to actually engage with bioregional topics. So an example is a really amazing organization in India who supports the emergence of river parliaments and river governance throughout Rajasthan. And one of the things that they do is actually they harness already existing Indian cultural festival to and kind of transform it into from a ritual of friendship to actually a friendship with the river. So they transform kind of existing rituals and spiritual practices into kind of opportunities to reconnect with nature and reconnect with the bioregion. And I think that's emerging across different bioregions. So we also see kind of cultural practices re-emerging and being harnessed to reconnect with the bioregion through kind of dancing that represents the flow of a river, or kind of these kinds of practices. So that's one emerging pattern that I think is really interesting and kind of core to bioregional organizing. You know, we often talk about kind of finance and governance, but you know, this kind of spiritual practices as part of the as part of bioregional governance is something that's really fascinating for me. And another one, maybe kind of on another side, is or from another perspective, is the development of regenerative value chains. So kind of not just regenerative agriculture, regenerative products, but thinking bioregionally throughout the whole value chain, from producing a material to actually using the material. What are all the kind of infrastructure that you need for that production? How are you creating business models that are aligned with regeneration? So yeah, two different patterns there, but yeah, lots of different patterns are re-emerging from looking at these initiatives.
Great, thank you so much, Andrea. Warren, we had a request if you could go on video. Oh, great! Now we can spotlight you to join in the group here. So there was a question for you. So Ralph will be spotlighting you in a moment. So Carlos also had a question for you, where he said, "Do you have an anecdote or a story of an initiative or an organization moving from ownership, knowledge ownership, to stewarding, so that we can reframe our messaging and collaborations in our own networks?"
I think all of indigenous knowledge systems are a stewardship. There is no ownership in our knowledge system. That's a false paradox that we have created because we want to patent knowledge. The idea of intellectual property is really an external way of protecting what we call innovation. indigenous systems. And one of the things that I was mentioning in my presentation, for instance, when we're thinking about the reason why we're thinking about indigenous data sovereignty is because for indigenous people, there is a collective ownership. So all the community has the rights to steward the knowledge of the community, a way of knowing and a way of not knowing. So, and then we have many things that's happening. For instance, the Declaration on Heritage Ecosystems is a way of protecting collective knowledge. So then we have Summa Causa, or living forest, the Declaration of the Living Forest. That goes even deeper into not only thinking about knowledge as a collective, commons, but knowledge emerges from place, time, and expression. So nature itself is where generates the library of knowledge. So nature is accredited when creating knowledge. So the Sayarayaku and many indigenous communities across the Andes and the Ecuador has multiple of these frameworks that talks about crediting knowledge to nature. So how do you own the knowledge of nature? It's only when we start thinking about research, development, and innovation, when we start very, very strategically funneling knowledge into one specific patent that we call our own, individual own. So there is multiple cases, and this is one of the things that when we think about cultural forms in law, is what is missing in here to really understand how do we steward knowledge, or how do we steward intellectual property in context and in place. So we have lost that, Now we need to come back and thinking about treaties instead of the act of appropriation law, which is happening after 1871, when we start implementing one way of governing the entire ecosystem of existence. So we need to start remembering how we created treaties in the early days of encounter era that created these cultural forms in the law. And that will help us really bring some of those learnings into contemporary times, and more so when we think about the digital space. How do we commune the digital space in such a way that is nobody's own property that it can accumulate wealth, but rather is a digital stewardship of the commons, such that we all can enjoy of the abundance, not the creation of a scarcity. That's kind of that what we are calling for data sovereignty. So many of us, when we say indigenous in front of that, we believe that's only for indigenous. No, this is if you will, we are creating a precedent. We need to start with a precedent. That's how we change laws in contemporary times. When we change laws in the social spectrum is by creating one case, and we center in that case to continuously reframe and retool the existing paradigms. And that's what we're trying to do in here. The idea in here, it should be relational data sovereignty. We all are related to place, to culture, to identity, and to the elements that we all need to live in. So think about just as a nucleide in the whole mycelium network, not as the whole thing, but indigenous data sovereignty is a nuclei to start a relational data sovereignty that is needed right now.
Thank you. Thank you, Maureen. Really, really comprehensive answer to that question. And you'll start to see that these questions are interconnected with one another. So Michael Lennon had a question for Wendy, Michael from the Chesapeake watershed, around this question of honoring sovereignty. He pointed back to Atosa's earlier Sacred Headwaters presentation, where she talked about the cost of reporting to donor endorsed systems being greater than the budget of the whole program. So he was wondering, how does Omni mapping anticipate lowering this cost of data inclusion or sovereignty?
Yeah, so I welcome a clarification on that question if my answer is not answering it the way Michael intended. Because to me, there's two things overlapping in that question. One is, how are we stewarding information so that we can help funders see the impact that they're having on the ground at the same time that we are freeing up time and resources for the actual work and of mapping and sharing and doing the work on the ground. So I feel like that question has a little bit of like, there's a lot of cost going into the reporting to the funders, and we're missing out on opportunities to turn some of those resources, both time and effort and energy, towards the actual work that needs to happen on the ground. So I heard a little bit of that in that question, as well as just how do we manage sovereignty, like in the digital spaces. So assuming those are the 2 points of question, and if you want to clarify, feel free to pop in. For me, the reporting, omni-mapping is really about the movement of data, not about which data goes where. So it's not so much focused on the reporting itself, although Omni could help provide structures and protocols for how best to do that. I think there are other platforms and organizations that have already figured out how to do that. The Bloom Network sounds like one that is already helping to facilitate that process. So Omni mapping is more about helping to make sure the data can go where people want it to go. So answering more the second part of what I think this question is about the sovereignty. To me, the infrastructures really need to allow for both what Maureen was talking about, both that ability to understand that we are all stewarding the ideas together from the field through us as filters to a shared common knowledge, and that knowledge is constantly evolving and we don't own it. At the same time, protecting from the current system's tendency to extract, so that if information gets put out at any layer of privacy or access, and then can be accessed by organizations or people who are looking to extract all that information, it needs some sense of decentralization and privacy protection so that people who are sharing feel safe to share, and that they can choose who they want to share it with. And in the tech world, in order to be able to do that, we need to tie it back to a particular person, not really to identify it as an IP, but simply to acknowledge the provenance of where it came from, and to provide spaces of safety and security so people feel like they can share with who they want, when they want, for as long as they want, and then to be able to draw that information back to their own private spaces, even if they wanted to. Those extra layers of tech that we're going to need to do that are coming. They're not quite here yet, but Omni Mapping is already working with the partners that will enable that in the future.
Thank you, Wendy. And we'll give a moment if Michael, if that was not quite what you were asking, just chime in. Otherwise, we'll assume that Wendy was picking up what you were putting down.
It was a great answer. I'll clarify in a particular way, and thus, and without one of the things that happens when there's a point of view about what data is collected by whom is often there's a kind of techno-colonialism. And to give an example in a very petty way, the way we organize place is by, let's say, zip code. And there's a movement to use watersheds instead, to use different ways of organizing information. And so this idea of whose perspective is used to organize the information, and then how does that become the way of keeping things going, is a question that we won't solve here. But I was trying to kind of be a provocateur in a sense, to really say that sometimes we jump at isn't it great, and what we're doing is codifying things that we've that are hidden in plain sight. Anyway, thank you. Great job. Keep up the great work.
Thank you. I love the question. I just want to reflect on that just a little bit, if we have time, Bill. Awesome. So yeah, to me, that's one of the advantages omni-mapping process and assessments is because we can, it allows communities an opportunity with its framing of questions to consider, how do we want to represent our data? So if a community wants to represent its data by zip code, maybe that community has an advantage for doing that for some reason. If another one wants to do it by story or by watershed, as you suggested, then the community could do it that way, in which case it may benefit from an upfront conversation about how best to do that so that the resulting maps look the way people want them to look, in ways that honor that sovereignty framed the way they want it to be framed. So all of those questions, I think, are very doable inside of current technological infrastructure, but not always done that way. And if somebody from the top down is making the decision, I think you're right. And that's what happens. Oh, we'll just do it this way. But if the community is asking themselves how they want to present the information, then it's allowed to emerge in a completely different way.
Thank you, Wendy. And thank you for Michael. That was an instance where the clarification really did take that to another layer. So thanks to you both for that exchange. I'm going to ask a cluster of questions to Mage, and then there's a couple of questions for Warren that I'll queue up after that exchange. So Mage, you may have seen in the sidebar, there were sort of a cluster of questions around sort of people wanting to understand Bloom by comparing it to other things that they're familiar with. So Gil Friend had asked about how it compares with Mycelial. It sounds like you don't actually know that platform, so you may not be able to answer that one. But Julie Wolf from Cascadia and the Olympic Peninsula confluence was asking how it compared to Hilo. And so many folks here do know Hilo. It's a platform oriented towards the regenerative community, and it's got a very strong bioregional presence. Finally, Jeff McNeely from Cascadia, the Salish Sea confluence, said, I'm wondering how the Bloom network can interface with the Regen Cascadia bioregion program. We've convened a formal landscape group here on Whidbey Island, and I think there may be an opportunity here to link the two programs together. So Mage, over to you for both how you compare to Hilo in particular, and then how you might be able to interact with this specific place-based Regen Cascadia bioregion program.
Sure. Yeah, if someone, Gil, if you're still here, could post the link to Mycelial, I'll check that out. I'm not familiar with that. Big fan of the mushrooms, though. And Hilo, yeah, we actually incubated Hilo in several ways when I was in the Bay Area at our local Bloom events. And we tried to use that for Bloom, and we were like, God damn it, we have to build our own platform. So some of the differences, like the interface is very, very different. One, it's geared to be a public-facing social media network, so you don't have to be part of a community to see the post. You can make a private post, but by default, it has these local place-based, the whole thing is a local first architecture. And then we're training people to manage local treasuries or bioregional treasuries that aren't necessarily like pegged to a government or a single organization. So those are a couple of structural differences. I haven't been on Hilo in a while, but we just found that our members needed a very different interface to interact with each other is all really. And yeah, I'm happy to talk with the crew from Cascadia or Whidbey Island. I sent you guys the link to where the kind of, how to anchor a local Bloom, start a local Bloom page or bioregional. Just to clarify that, like you can start there's like nested scales of locality in Bloom, right? Like you could have a neighborhood scale Bloom. You could have one that's, you're using the city name or the indigenous place name, if you're coming from that perspective. Or on up to a large bioregion, like our Northeast Bioregioning Collective that spans like multiple states, right? And then the content kind of bubbles up. So if you post hyper locally, it'll also show at the higher scales. But yeah, I would suggest going to that link and then share interests. We could get you set up with a place-based local feed. But I also have no idea what you have going on the ground. So having a conversation about that, what your program is, how we can collaborate would be the next step there. You're welcome to email me, magenta@bloomnetwork.earth.
Cool. Thank you so much, Mage. I was going to ask another question to first, but I actually think I'm going to piggyback here because there was another kind of compare and contrast question. So we might as well sort of continue with that train of thinking. So there was a question from the confluence, the North Sea rivers in Flanders, Belgium, and this was from Sarah there. And she asked for Wendy the differences and similarities between Omni mapping and Catalyst compared to Kumu and SumApp. If you could just help them wrap their head around that. Thanks.
Yeah, there's a lot of tools. We're actually trying to work on something to help people figure this out. Okay, but since we don't have that. Okay, so Omni mapping is really a prep work. It's really helpful. It's tools and processes and standards and protocols that help communities prepare their data for whatever platform they want to use. So if they're not sure, then running through the Omni mapping assessment that I shared in the presentation, you can find the free resource through the link, is a way to help prepare you for what technology you want to adopt. So in that sense, if somebody decides to use Catalyst, and Catalyst as our partner, is already designed to receive all the different layers that the assessment parses out. So if somebody were wanting to be really nuanced with their privacy and access settings and collaboration protocols and sharing across their networks, Catalyst is a nice platform for that. Then they would move on to Catalyst, where all that data would then be visualized with the benefits of all the interconnection that has been woven in. So that's Catalyst. Kumu is one way to visualize all the interconnected data. So Catalyst is interoperable and has protocols for sharing things with Kumu, and then Kumus can be viewed right on top of Catalyst. You don't have to leave Catalyst to see a Kumu, along with like 7 or 8 other types of views that you can do. You can do a swipe view, you can do a directory view. So the same data can be viewed multiple ways at the same time to serve the community however they need in terms of their structure, their goals. And so I'm not as familiar with SumApp, but maybe with that gives you enough foundation that the rest is obvious. I'm not sure. Hopefully. Happy to answer any more questions about that.
Thanks, Wendy. Yeah, I know that in the Co-Fund Eco, the co-creating funding ecosystems community, Ben Roberts in particular has done a kind of mashup between Kumu and SumApp, where SumApp is doing sort of the data harvesting and organizing, and then marrying that with Kumu. So I think that might be part of where the question is coming from. So thank you for that.
Got you. Yeah, so I would think then SumApp would be even more complementary in the sense of all the others. It's almost like they all kind of go together, and all have a little bit of a variation on a theme to help support each other. So yeah, sometimes if you have a ton of data, being able to scrape it and then transform it so that it's ready for a visualizer like Kumu or Catalyst is an important intermediary step. We use Airtable, but yeah, either way, sometimes that work is pretty significant to transform current data structures into new data structures for these new visualizations. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks, Wendy. And I think I see there might be some dialogue in the sidebar. I think I see Ben chiming in on this as well. I want to pivot to another question that has come in. I think this one is primarily geared towards Warren, but I think we may just open this up. And it's kind of a return to this question of ownership, but I think not sort of a direct ownership versus stewardship like we addressed before. So this is a question again from the North Sea rivers in Flanders, Belgium, their confluence, and particularly from Neil Davidson there. So he says, given current data/knowledge ownership by institutions such as mapping agencies and business. So, for example, Google or Facebook or et cetera, and the rise of AI. So the question is, how do we protect not just indigenous sovereignty, but also the invaluable natural features such as endangered species or wildlife habitat corridors that could come up for purchase? What he's suggesting is that they would immediately be threatened as soon as sort of the exploitative Horizon 1 players gain access. So in other words, how can we, use this knowledge sovereignty as a form of protection from the kinds of exploitations that the current power structure systems are their patterns would entail. So Warren, over to you, and then I'll open it up to see if others have answers to that question.
Yeah, there is where we start thinking about that nature is everywhere. You see, nature is everywhere. We are nature and nature is us. So it doesn't become anymore about protecting the Amazon. It also becomes protecting your own forests. So this is where we start thinking about complementary opposite characteristics of existing legal infrastructures. So as I said before, indigenous data sovereignty is just a nuclei to start a bigger conversation that should be relational data sovereignty. So if we are thinking about this in a very particular way, there is existing laws, and depending where you are in different ecosystems, right? So many countries, communities, states, you name it, are quickly bringing rights of nature into this place. So we could use actually rights of nature to think about the protection of these species as they have agency, as they more and more so we're recognizing rights of nature. We can utilize the personhood of nature to protect the element. So one case instance in Ecuador, we have rights of nature in our constitution. In practice, it doesn't work that well, in practice. So in practice, it comes down to us, to the communities, to the people that we are interested in protecting endangered species. So what we have done is in our rivers, we have started thinking about what is key species that are providing, cultural, spiritual, ecological function, services, and processes, and start utilizing rights of nature to provide a personhood. Once we provide that level of discussion, what happens is we start bringing two existing international laws, not just for indigenous people, but globally. So the World Intellectual Property Organization has issued that any genetic data that's coming in from ecosystems, it needs to be disclosed, meaning data provenance. Where is the data coming from? And what is the knowledge associated to the species? So in one of the charts they mentioned, they say, indigenous knowledge or cultural knowledge is a commons meaning that help us dive in deeper. Scientifically, I will agree with that statement. Scientifically, if we're talking about genetics, then yes. But if we talk about social ecology, indigenous knowledge systems or local knowledge is the way to get very deep in understanding why these plants is. So we can use the WIPO treaty of the last year to implement protection in these endangered species. Plus the Caliphant that talks about protection and compensation into genetic material that's coming from these species of interest. So when we are thinking about exploitation from these endangered species, remember there is an economical interest behind it. So we can utilize these mechanisms to protect these endangered species in situ. We're now needing to think about that this is only working for indigenous people, local communities, or Afro descents. These treaties are meant to protect all scales. So that is kind of where we are looking. First, if your region have rights of nature or is working around, take that and implement that into the personhood of the endangered species. That should give us a human agency to speak on behalf of the endangered species in the court of law and protect them as a commons or biocultural heritage, or rather in the heritage ecosystems that is part of the World Heritage Sites. So there is instruments that we can use right now to protect endangered species, but also where we need to continuously work around and going back to Wendy's point of where the work is doing is data curation, meaning data provenance. Where is the data coming from? How it was collected? Who collected it? That also helps the metadata to protect these endangered species, because now we know who is stewarding it. Who stewards it in the urban ecosystem, rural and suburban areas. So I will look into these elements and then look into data. There is a lot of like a data trust that is emerging in Europe. There is a data trust that you can utilize those infrastructures to bring forward a tag, tagging the data provenance, when was collected, how it was collected, who is storing the species, and all the different treaties that exist in the protection of the endangered species. All of a sudden, it's no longer indigenous data sovereignty. All of a sudden, we talk about relational data sovereignty that each of us, we can exercise into protecting these very precious species. And that will help us also thinking about how do we continuously operationalize rights of nature and how we advocate for the agency of these ecosystems that often it seems like not have the right advocacy. That's something that we're working on and continuously developing into creating data contracts, data frameworks. In Latin America, we are working into the operational guidelines for environmental data. So it's not only about indigenous people data, but environmental data, which is everything that is within the ecosystem should undergo a pre-informed consent. What is that? How do we bring nature into the pre-informed consent? Well, this is where we're talking about when who lives in the ecosystem should be the first person to speak on behalf of those ecosystems. Not only NGOs that are interested in protecting the endangered species, but the local people that has to live with these ecosystems needs to understand why do we are protecting them and why is this species of interest to science, but also to cultures.
Thank you. Wow. Really, really great response there. And just from the sidebar, Indy Singh had said, maybe connect health data as well. So not just the environmental, but the human ecosystems as well. We had a question, sort of a follow-up, but I want to pause and just see if on this particular question that we're working with, Andrea, Wendy, or Mage, if you had anything that you wanted to add to that, or whether we should move on.
Yeah, just quickly wanted to add that that's
Great.
exactly why it's such an important moment to be talking about knowledge commons and data commons. So not just kind of protecting our data and our knowledge, but how do we create those boundaries and learn to steward and govern our data and knowledge collectively so that we are keeping it safe within kind of with processes and rules created by our own communities and defined by the cultures that are actually creating and using that knowledge.
Thank you, Andrea. Mage, I think I saw you go off mute. Did you want to chime in here briefly?
Oh, I love what Lorene was saying so much, all of that. Oh man, I wish like all data handling could be just Like, all right, we're going by this, guys, come on. Yeah, just data unions also resonated with me. I've worked as a contractor on a couple of data union projects on the blockchain side. I mean, I don't know if adding blockchain like helps or hurts it, but it makes it easy to track fractional data ownership. And if, say, you have some like healthcare agency accessing the data from farmers and Indigenous folks and XYZ people who are generating that data, then it makes it just very easy to fractionally distribute the payment to access that data to those people. This is just a payments infrastructure, like side note. But data unions have been coming up in my local Bloom organizing work with Julie Davidson as well, because farmers keep getting asked to like put their data in these corporate things. They don't benefit from them. The corporate people give them some stupid thing like, we'll give you access to vendors or something, and just like shitty for the farmers, right? So we're looking at, I think we have an opportunity to maybe pull some funding into making a prototype of that. I think the hurdle there is like, we need to generate a list of questions to ask her boss. And then I think that company may be able to like fund an initial prototype of it, not owned by the company, obviously owned by the farmers, but yeah, I'm really, I guess if anyone else knows of data sovereignty, data union kind of efforts, I'm really eager to like receive links to those and like learn what other people are doing. And yeah, I don't know how to convey, Maureen, like how much love and respect and gratitude I have for your perspective sharing on all the topics you've been sharing. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, in Latin America, like I said, we're building this infrastructure for data, for environmental data. Well, one pointed out, health data. When we think about environmental data, we really think about the One Health approach: animal, plant, and social. The whole approach. So this is the moment where you start thinking about data, really, in a sense of stewarding the knowledge commons. So the more that we can link and share resources and collaborate and implement in each other's initiatives and works, the more we make it visible and the more it become, fungible to different entities that they are not doing it. So really looking forward to, after this, whoever wants to chime in and talk how we can implement these infrastructures. We're looking forward to, at least from the context of Latin America and the Caribbean, we're doing some interesting work. Many people that are working in environmental markets, biodiversity and credits. What is that? These are unicorns. We don't even know what they are. They just data points. So how do we visualize the unicorns into little horses? That's kind of what we're trying to do.
Thank you. What's emerging here, it feels very, very rich, and certainly, one container that we could follow up on this is in the Bioregional Knowledge Commons community of inquiry and practice that Andrea and I are co-stewarding. So that's one container, but there are certainly others. I just wanted to note that when you were asking if there might be others, Mage, Weston Mossman from the San Francisco Bay Delta bioregion chimed in like right as you were asking that. So he said Data Union DAO is working on a great system for this. So ask and ye shall receive, I think is one way of framing it. We've got a pretty meaty question here from Stefan from the Central Valley in Costa Rica, and I'd seen his hand up, and so thank you for going ahead and adding that into the sidebar. This may end up being our last question. We've got about 10 questions going here. Oh, there we go. So Stefan asks, building on Maureen's point, noting the need to build power, but also the inevitability to, at some point, interface with the pre-existing political structure. I'm curious how the approach of rights of nature can be operationalized in a country like Costa Rica, where the Escazú agreement, for example, was signed but never ratified. Consultative mechanisms like ILO 169 also don't get enforced, even if they are legally binding. So in other words, how can our approaches generate political buy-in? Is it something we should even be looking for, or is the power building strategy needing to stay away from the pre-existing political infrastructure which does have the power to enforce binding agreements like the ones previously mentioned. So it's a sort of, inside outside question. Do we go for, engaging the existing power structure or not? Warren, I see you off mute, but let's give everyone a chance to weigh in on this one. But go ahead, Warren, since you're off mute.
No, go ahead. Anybody wants to chime in, I can chime in afterwards.
Great. Open that up. Andrea, Wendy, Mage, do you have a power chiming in on the power side of things? Wendy.
Oh, I'd say it's really maybe more of a belief than it is a path. But for me, from what I've seen in many different sectors of our current society and the way it's breaking down, changing it from within is not working and hasn't been working and is like swimming upstream. So to me, that same sort of feeling applies to this question, where we're wise, I think, to continue to develop things as much as we can in parallel, creating bridges to the old system. I love what Warren was talking about in terms of the legalities of how to use the current legal system, maybe just pulling on a few threads to help protect the new and emerging ecosystems. Things like trusts, commons trusts, and things like that too, for the flows of funds, I think are kind of another example of how we use just threads of the old system, combining it in completely new ways. So I'm seeing things going in parallel for as long as possible before those meet. And hopefully we'll end up with an entirely new self-supporting social system where all the domains are elevated and developed enough that they can start to support each other. New governance systems, new legal systems, new tech systems, new relational systems, which I know is already being worked on by everybody here, that can be self-reinforcing instead of us needing the reinforcement to come from the old system.
Thanks, Wendy. Opening it up to others.
Yeah, I guess I'm also on the parallel systems camp. What I've seen, I live in New Hampshire. I don't know if folks know about like the Free State project here, but like local organizing works very well. Local policy, larger scales than that are tricky. But if you federate and collaborate with like multiple local municipalities around your region, the other thing that I have limited exposure to, but somehow, so when I've talked with people who do Indigenous coalition work in the Amazon and other places, their depth of leadership and knowledge of where to go to wisely steward resources and also address problems like drug issues. Different communities talked with in Colombia, for example, like they have very robust strategy around environmental protection and healing from various situations and stuff. And so it seems to me there's I think there's probably a financial capacity gap in some ways and maybe a legal gap. But for example, like farmers who are coming in and deforesting an area, or corporations who are doing that under the guise of eco credits or whatever, would the people who own that land make more money by doing integrated agroforestry or forest crops and keeping the forest intact? Like, are there like small, because a lot of these corporations use the guise of, we're going to give you local jobs. And I think, I've actually been wanting to find people who have crunched the data on that, because my instinct is that's actually not a valid argument. If you teach people to do robust self-management of their ecologies, they can generate abundant well-being for their community without having to, rape the nature, basically. So yeah, parallel systems, local and like coalition-based organizing seems like a solid path to me, rather than expecting systems that are designed to be extractive from a history of colonization and slavery through and through and through. Like, that's a heavy, very slow system to try to move.
Well stated, Magenta. Andrea, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I guess with So a lot of organizers that I've spoken with locally around my bioregion in Spain and France, they see kind of something maybe a bit similar to what you said, Magenta, that really like taking power or trying to shift power at a local level is a really successful strategy, whereas maybe at a national level it's not. So actually working within municipalities or working within rural regions to actually collaborate with the current power structures can be really successful, because often kind of regional governments or local governments have similar similar objectives to bioregional organizers, and it's a lot easier to kind of reach power in these local levels. So I think maybe like in terms of, as well as building alternative systems, just trying to work with the current power structures at the level where it feels like the system can be moved. And it also depends on kind of where you're from, how much it's possible to actually work within the power structures or not. But I guess at least here in Spain, working locally with power structures at the municipal level can be really successful.
Great. Let's hear from Warren last on this issue. And I would encourage folks not to miss the comment in the sidebar from Ondine on a bio quote. Warren, over to you for thoughts on the power question.
Yeah, I will say what happened during when we start the discussion of the United Nations declarations on the rights of indigenous people. At that time, indigenous people from Tortoise Island, they brought a wampum bell to remind us of the treaties during the encounter era. In the wampum bell, there is two parallel lines that's moving forward. And there are beats that symbolize a boat that's moving in the river. We are all flowing in the same river, but we are all holding our own autonomy. So the creation of law or the structured systems that we call colonialism and we call oppression and power and so forth emerge out of these encounter era treaty systems that for some folks, treaty meant something very profound, a duty of caring for the planet, for the people that was joining their new lands. For other people, it meant a way of getting access to goods and services and products. So we are in continuously encounter eras, and our legal systems are continuously evolving depending on how we encounter each other, whereas we are the encountering point that we are coming through. We will interact with the current power structure and with the current systems. We have to. We cannot. We can all dream and think about like we will collapse. The system is collapsing. Well, we are doing a lot of things. In a call when other indigenous thinkers we were talking about, we're doing the right thing in the wrong system. We are strengthening the system itself that creates the problems that we are trying to do. And this kind of Wendy and many of you, Andrea, has talked about like trying to fix from getting inside out, very hard. You're getting a bureaucratic sense. So my approach to this is parallel. Let's remember this encounter era parallels, how we encounter in a parallel and holding autonomy. We need to continuously build alternative infrastructures that it holds in the agency of the local community, that holds in the context on which it was created. And let's create treaties that meant what we think it will meant when the existing systems. If we do this, it's not about collapsing one over the other one or creating another dominant structure, but is about this. Once again, I bring this complementary opposite characteristics. We all have gained something from this current system, and we all have suffered from the current system. So what can we learn from the current system such that we don't make the same mistakes in the emerging systems? And that's how we bring those two things together. Local is working very good. We need to not scale it, not grow it. We need to increment it. We need to increase it by bringing more provinces into that discussion, more so. And that way, we are not talking about scaling models. We're thinking about increasing by also the buy-in of the neighboring communities, neighboring cities that is seeing the implementation and how these infrastructures can benefit. And then slightly thinking about what is this emergence that's taking place and convergence that will take place. We need to interact with the structural power, but we need to build our own infrastructure. And that's the only way that we can go back to this old history of the one-pound bell and treaty system during the encounter era.
All right. Let's all breathe that in. Really, really deep discussion in this panel. I want to thank each one of you, Andrea, Wendy, Magenta, Warren. That's your order on my screen. Thank you so much for presenting. Thank you to everyone online for the really great questions that elicited such great dialogue here. And I want to ask everyone to just hold this and see how it weaves with the rest of the conference. We have about an 8-minute break, so until 10 after the hour, when we'll come back and hear from Lila June Johnston with a keynote on indigeneity and bioregioning. So let's take a quick break and come back. Again, thanks to the panel, and we look forward to seeing you all again very soon. See you in about 8 minutes of the conference. Second keynote. Oh, welcome back to the R3.0 conference and the second keynote of the day, the final session of the day. We are really honored to be joined again by Lila June Johnston. She's spoken at a previous conference of ours, and so this is her second time speaking with us, and she also spoke with in one of our open dialogues earlier this year, and we're particularly excited to be inviting her to essentially go a step deeper than in the past to look at the research that she's done on essentially the bioregional scale history and ongoing practice of Indigenous regenerative ecosystem design and management, and to build on that to look at this connection between indigeneity and bioregioning. So with that, I wanted to invite Lila June to go off mute and bring your slides up, and we'll get rolling.
Hello, beautiful people out there in the world. I hope you're all doing well. I see some of you from my Becoming a Regenerative Human course, which is cool. Hello, hello. I'm so happy to be here. My heart is so open and so full. I've been hanging out with wonderful people the past 48 hours, and they have me really grounded in my heart. So I'm gonna go ahead and start. I can hear whenever someone comes into the waiting room and joins, it's like ding ding. So I don't know if there's any way to turn that off. It might be slightly distracting, but if not, that's also okay. Maybe you could make me not co-host so I don't hear it. and then you could share my slides for me. Well, no, that won't work. All right, I'm just going to deal with it. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about, I mean, there's lots of things you could call it, but today let's call it Indigenous Regenerative Bioregional Design. I say there's lots of things you can call it because bioregionalism is not an Indigenous word per se, although there are many words that mean something like it. But I think you all know what I mean. Perhaps the best way to say it is what we call in English bioregionalism from an Indigenous lens. And I say an Indigenous lens because there are many Indigenous lenses. There is not an Indigenous lens. There are so many. And I just am one of them. So I want to run through a couple of examples of Indigenous bioregionalism in hopes that it would not only inspire us of ways to do it out in the world, but also to remind us that this has already been going on for like tens of thousands of years. This is not a novel concept. This is something Native people have been asking the world to do since the beginning of colonization. Not just the colonization of what we now call the Americas, but even of the colonization of the British Isles, which happened 2,000 years ago by the Romans, when the Druidic cultures were already doing their own bioregionalism in the British Isles, and the times when our people from all parts of the world were doing their own beautiful version of bioregionalism. I think oftentimes we have this misconception that anything in the past must automatically have been more primitive and less intelligent than us today, and less civilized. When in fact, I think it's safe to say that we've probably never been more uncivilized than we are today. More primitive than we are today, in the sense that we have very deeply forgotten what matters and what's important. But we're about to remember. Okay, so yeah, I'm really excited to share some of these things. And yeah, it's nothing new. It's been around forever. And not only that, but how do we, within what we call the bioregionalist movement, the bioregionalist community, how do we effectively, properly, respectfully, appropriately engage with and collaborate with and unite with Indigenous communities who are trying to do this all day, every day already? So yeah, let's go ahead and get into just a couple examples, some historical, some contemporary. Some are both historical and contemporary because they've been happening for thousands of years and they're still happening. So this is a picture of a ahupua'a, which is a Hawaiian bioregional strategy, which I'll get into later. And later, we're going to again ask, how do we bioregional practitioners and thinkers respectfully and effectively work with and honor Native nations today? So the first bioregional example I want to talk about is the Shawnee chestnut groves. These specific groves I'm talking about were in Kentucky. You can see these old growth American chestnuts that once grew from Maine down into Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. And the Shawnee were more in this Kentucky region. But this was once thought to be a natural or wild chestnut grove, meaning it just naturally occurred. It had no human causes. We now know that we can pretty darn confidently infer that this was actually a man-made and man-managed chestnut grove, human-made, human-managed, because we see very distinctly in time when fossilized chestnut, black walnut, hickory nut, and other domesticated plant species come into the picture very suddenly, very rapidly, which I'm going to show you in a second. And I say all of this in the past tense because the American chestnut groves nearly were completely wiped out in the early 1900s when they became infected on a broad scale by a pathogenic blight, a tree disease. And this happened because when colonists came, they started to propagate the trees in very close together in straight lines, because that's what we were thinking that was a good idea to do at the time. Or we still think that sometimes. And that made the trees weak because they're not spread out. Viruses can jump easier. Their genes get too close together. They're competing for limited sunlight, nutrients, and water when they're too close together, and that also weakens their immune systems. And genetically, they became vulnerable. And that's what my elders said led to the chestnut blight. But anyways, we're going to talk about the Shawnee. Actually, this is in Tennessee. This is a gigantic old growth chestnut, and the native people who took care of it for generations. And the whole world witnessed in horror as all the chestnuts, whole valleys of chestnuts just disappeared, including this one. So we only have black and white photos of them. But this is an artist rendition of a chestnut that's more isolated, more allowed to grow and be a chestnut. It's not surrounded by, dozens of other chestnut trees. It's allowed to have its own sunlight, its own water, its own nutrients to grow and flourish and sort of billow out the way a tree would like to. But these days we go into a national forest and we see 200 trees per acre, 300 trees per acre, fighting for the canopy, fighting for sunlight, and they end up over competing and crunching each other out, and then they all get diseases, as we see with the bark beetle or other things. And so specifically, we're looking at the Shawnee because this is a pond in Kentucky where they took out soil cores, and these soil cores contained 9,500 years worth of information. And this information was analyzed to see how the vegetation changed over time. Here's the time on the left-hand side: 0 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, blah, 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 all the way down to 9,500 years. And of course, when we have pollen settling on top of a, sorry, let me move this up here. Oh, there we go. When we have pollen settling on top of a pond, rather falling and settling in the mud, year after year after year, it stacks up on top of each other. And we can reconstruct history based on fossilized pollen records. So this is the pollen profile of this lake. And you can see each column is the presence or absence of a certain kind of pollen. And you could see 3,000 years ago, chestnut comes in with a bang. Hickory nut comes in strongly. 2,000 years ago, black walnut comes in out of nowhere. We also have just a greater biodiversity, whereas before it was very dominated by cedar and to some extent hemlock. And we see also on this very right-hand side fossilized charcoal, which indicates that Shawnee people managed this food forest with routine burning of the forest floor, which is very common. Some of you may have heard of it, some of you may not. But fire is one of the most important regenerative tools of Indigenous nations throughout time. You could certainly argue that. We also have sumpweed, sunflower, goosefoot. These are all edible plant species coming into the record strongly. And so scientists interpret this to say that 3,000 years ago, Shawnee peoples or their ancestors moved in, created a biodiverse food forest, and sustained it for 3,000 years straight without end, which I think is quite impressive because we can't seem to sustain anything these days for longer than 10 years. Okay, the next bioregional thing I want to share is the Kwakwaka'wakw clam gardens. Kwakwaka'wakw clam gardens. So to build a clam garden, you build an intertidal rock wall. And you create these, you can see on this is a darker line is a rock wall. And when the tide goes up, water fills into this area. And when the tide goes down, water stays in this area because the the rock wall that you've built becomes a kind of retaining wall. And it helps to expand clam habitat because you can see with the wall here, the shoreline looks like this, the one the guy is standing on. Without the rock wall, the shoreline gets much more steeper and there's less area where clams can exist. So this area on the right, from the black triangle all the way to that where that guy is standing, that is what is added to the substrate when you build a clam garden in terms of expanded clam habitat. So they're very interesting things. And we know that 35% of the coastline was marked by these clam gardens, these rock walls. And guess how old they are? They are 3,500 years old, some of these clam gardens. So it's quite fascinating how this all works. I'm going to turn off my camera just while I give this presentation because I think the internet's a bit unstable. And so we see that these clam gardens are completely bioregionally based economy because this is the place where the clams are. And we see a kind of biomimicry, observing the conditions in which clams thrive and augmenting those conditions. Of course, like I said, we have the Ahupua'a system, which is like the most classic version of indigenous bioregionalism. We have each watershed is a district, and each district is called an Ahupua'a, which means the rocks of pigs, like a pig sacrificing area to the gods, which is where the rocks would be piled at the edges of these districts. So the Ahupua'a is each watershed district, and every person's kuleana, or their responsibility, was to their specific Ahupua'a, where they were born or where they married into or where they resided. And so the Ahupua'a system has several layers. It's also a food system. So the food system begins in this area, sort of in the lower, flatter lands, and that's where they would grow, and they still do grow, kalo fields, the lo'i. The lo'i fields are where they plant kalo, also known as taro, which is a very important part of the traditional and contemporary Hawaiian diet. They pound it up and make a pearl-like dough called poi. They also will grow a number of trees, food trees, such as the breadfruit tree, which is really important part. And then you have fish ponds down below, which actually serve as fish traps. As the tide goes up and down, it brings fish in. And then as they eat all of the nutrients from the lo'i and the breadfruit trees and all the agriculture up above, they get so fat that the fish can't get out. So anyways, I like this right-hand picture because it actually involves people. You know, I don't like these left pictures where like there's no people, because that's not really how it is. True bioregional systems, humans are not seen as apart from nature. We are seen as nature, and we are a vital ecosystem keystone species, which is a linchpin upon which the whole ecosystem depends. And the lo'i, the taro fields, are actually systems that attract endangered birds to the area. And so this type of agriculture does not destroy wildlife, it actually attracts wildlife. And so we can create food for ourselves and support surrounding animals and plants at the very same time. It's not an either or. And the last thing I really want to say, or I have to say about this system, is that in pre-colonial Hawaiian times, there were arguably more people there than there are today. They did carrying capacity studies, looking at how many people could a single Ahupua'a sustain. And they estimated by present day Ahupua'as that this island-wide system, multi-island system, could have sustained 1.2 million people at least. And looking at archaeological remains, we believe there were about that many people there. And so that's more people than there are today. And if you think about it, today there are less people in Hawaii, and they are importing 90% of their foods. So I don't ever want people to think that indigenous food systems are cute or impotent or small or small scale. These things are not only capable of feeding 8 billion people on the planet, but if you want to feed 8 billion people, these are the systems you should use, because you can do so without destroying the earth. These are ways that are win-win situations. They help the earth win and they help humans win at the same time. So I could actually give you a number of other examples. I love to talk about the burning moon and how burning bison populations and that kind of bioregional care, the nations, right? But I won't get too deep into that. There's also the Baure floodplain aquaculture, which many of you may have heard of in Bolivia, where whole floodplains were transformed into really productive cities, food systems. You had a perennial supply of fish because the fish would get stuck in these reservoirs when the waters would recede. And so you had reservoirs and fish weirs all made out of earthen berms, raised agricultural fields, raised forest islands where fruit trees were planted. Fruit trees were planted along the fish weirs, the berms. There was escargot all over the place. This was a very rich, very abundant system. It was largely destroyed when the Spanish came to Bolivia. And we could still see remnants of it from aerial photography. And this is after 500 years of weathering. We can still see these earthen berms in the floodplain. But this is sort of a floodplain bioregion. And each of these bioregions, I cannot emphasize enough, were turned into food systems. To create a bioregion, you do not have to protect it from humans. You actually need to integrate humans who know how to behave regeneratively, because we are an integral part of the world. We're not like an accident. Just like any other plant or animal, we have a purpose here, and we need to give ourselves permission to live within the land, as the land, for the land, and also to receive the abundance of the land all at the same time. This is the area that was managed, this floodplain area. So it's really important to remember that these things have existed for time immemorial. They're usually holistic design, landscape scale, ecosystemic, millennial scale. Everything I've shown you is over 1,000 years old. The focus on habitat expansion, which means they're cage-free and they're fence-free, because instead of caging their food, they're making a home for their food. Very different mentality. It's more of a stewardship mentality. And so I just briefly want to say what's more important than the materials that they use to build these systems is the worldview and the value system that they carry, which I call the software. So the hardware is like the human body or a clam garden, but the software is the invisible world of the human heart of why are you building the clam garden? And I always give this thought experiment. What if you gave the clam garden to a capitalist? Who has the capitalist software inside the brain that's governing the body? Would that clam garden have lasted 3,500 years? Probably not, because the software of capitalism is about immediate return. It does not design for perpetuity. It does not design for things to last. That's not what it's for. So, in other words, these softwares are so important. Here's an example of a value system of the Anishinaabe 7 grandfather teachings. This is a kind of indigenous software where all these 7 teachings it was so important to teach them to the next generation. And they are honesty, humility, wisdom, love, respect, bravery, truth. If these 7 virtues, if these 7 values are the software that is governing the body, what a different world it would be than the world we see outside today, which is not these things, but it's more like resume building, capital maximization, hierarchy. Those are the sort of unsustainable softwares that we have to debug and replace with these more sustainable ones. Each of the 7 grandfather teachings has an animal associated with it. So I call this like the ruler software that thinks we're supposed to be here to like rule the earth versus the guardian software that says we're here to guard the earth, to take care of her. Very distinctly different. And it may sound so simple, but if it's so simple, why hasn't the supposedly most advanced civilizations figured this one out? And we really got to get this going before we can heal the outer world. We have to heal the outer world. We have to guard in our minds and our hearts can properly skip this part. So the software that I find across the board for Indigenous bioregional or regenerative ecosystem design is respect, reverence, reciprocity, responsibility, relationality or kinship with all life, restraint, not taking more than you need, and regeneration, which to me means leaving the place better than you found it. So the key takeaways are humanity has been a keystone species before and can become one again. Our technology does not need to change as much as our values do. And in fact, until our values change, there is no technology that's going to save us. We can take what we need while nourishing and generating Mother Earth at the same time. All of these systems are win-win systems. The clam gardens are designed to not just give humans clams, but to give the minks clams, the water birds, the raccoons, the otters. They are allowed and encouraged to come and eat from the bounty of these clam gardens as well. It's for everyone. We augment abundance for everyone and everything, including ourselves. This is scalable if we follow the leadership of unique Indigenous traditional leaders that are unique to their specific homelands. So that's just a quick run through. I know I went way over time, but just to briefly speak, and feel free to give me notes, Ralph, in the chat. I see our private message if, to tell me when to wrap up. But we're going to take a little break soon, if I'm not mistaken. But before we do, I really want to just at least introduce, if it's okay, the topic of how do we be in right relationship with Native nations? And I guess the first thing I can just say, obviously, right off the bat, is that we need to follow their leadership wherever we are. And that goes for everywhere. So as a Dene woman, I am currently in Norwich, United Kingdom. I have to follow the Druidic peoples who stewarded this land. That's what I have to do. And then if a person from Norwich comes to the desert, to my homeland, they need to follow my language and my science, because that science and that language, by definition, Indigenous sciences, Indigenous languages, are those that have been in one place for thousands of years. That's like the baseline definition of indigeneity. And so they're going to be really, really good at taking care of that land because they've tried and failed so many times there that they got it pretty dialed in like 99% of the time. I won't say all the time because there's always exceptions, but we should at least give that leadership a chance. And so the biggest thing is before you start acting in a specific place, before you start shoveling dirt and moving stuff around and doing different things, in my opinion, one should always, always, always consult first with the Indigenous nation. And the way that I train people to do that is with a magical question, which opens up doors, which creates the avenue for extraordinary collaboration, which honors Indigenous nations and makes them feel safe and seen and heard, which is, the magical question is, how may I help your ecological goals, if at all? How may I help your ecological goals here, your stewardship goals here, your bioregional goals here, if at all? That way you put them in the driver's seat of how you are in service to them. And I say this because the opposite of that, which happens way too often, has happened to me many times, is how can you be in service to my stewardship agenda? Right? How can you, Native American person, or whomever it is, whatever nation it is around the world, how can you serve my settler idea of what restoration is, of what conservation is, because I'm the boss, I won the colonial battle, and now you just have to serve my agenda. So we're trying to flip that script, and as settlers always come humbly as guests. It's like if you go to someone's home, you wouldn't say, hey, open your door, let me in. And by the way, I want all the salami, cheese, and crackers in your fridge. And I want to sit on your couch, and I want to put my feet up on your coffee table and give me the remote, right? You would never do that. When you go to someone's home, you say, hello, I'm so happy to, hi, give them a hug. Do I take my shoes off, or do you leave your shoes on? It's their home, right? So you want to be a respectful guest. You want to try to learn, how do I be in this person's home? How do I be? And guess what? Native people, we love to host guests. We love to be hospitable. We love that. And that's what we always wanted from the get-go, was just to be hosts. That's why we are always saving people coming off the boats who were dying. When they came this way, we were taking care of them, because that's who we are. We're a caring, hospitable people. And so it can be such a wonderful relationship of guest and host, of learning, of service learning, of exchange of knowledge. But first and foremost, the magical question is, how may I be of service to your stewardship goals? And you usually would ask the grassroots women leaders. You wouldn't go to the tribal BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs government, because those governments, generally speaking, were created by the colonial powers. So you don't want to go to like NavajoNation.com or .nsngov, whatever they do these days, because as a Dene woman, I can tell you my tribal government is a puppet government. It was designed by and large to facilitate the extraction of resources from my homeland. This isn't true for every Native nation, but just be careful who you ask when you say, how may I help your stewardship goals, if at all? Because if you ask the corrupt Navajo Nation, God bless them, it's not their fault. They're just stuck in a system that was designed to fail. They might not have the greatest stewardship goals. So usually you ask the grassroots women leaders of whichever nation whose home you are standing on. Those are the people to ask, because the women are the leaders of Native nations usually, and they're also the ones who have their hand on the pulse of what the next generation needs, because they have birthed that generation themselves out of their own bodies. So it's really good to touch base with them and see what the stewardship goals are from their perspective, because they're really good at that future sight of being the mother of the future. Not mother in the future, but a mother of the future. What do you think, Bill? Shall we give a 5-minute break now?
The plan was to just, this session is going through the top of the hour. So we were going to open it up after your presentation, open it up to Q&A. So I certainly have some inputs, but we'll check out what people have to say. How does that sound, Lila June?
Oh, yeah. I think I misread bioregional for bio break, which is hilarious. Yeah. Let's do the Q&A up to the top of the hour. We are wide open for questions, comments. I know I kind of gave you guys like a rapid fire idea of everything. I apologize for that. But I wanted to fit in as much as I could with the time that we had. So yeah, does anyone have any questions or comments?
Yeah, so if folks want to just raise your hand.
Back to this piece.
Okay, cool.
So I didn't mean to interrupt, but I am interrupting. Hi, everybody.
Sorry, Jelani is just so Jelani, who did the
Hello all. I'm casually interrupting. I apologize in a sense, but not really. I wish you were all here, and that really is important that we're all here. I'm very happy that you're all here, and we're all working together. But I had to let him know we're going to be gathering on the reservation soon. So I'm going to go set up everything again, because we're doing some cleanup. So in the sacred burial grounds, we can clean it up. And you guys are all welcome. I'm going to go get some orders and stuff. And God bless you all. We'll see you all tomorrow, inshallah, God willing. Ohio. And
Thank you, Jelani.
thank you for that. And see you up top, right?
We'll see you. So there's an exchange right there where Jelani was inviting work. So in the confluence for the Northeast Woodlands Bioregional Collective, we're hosting it here at the Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Research Center. And Jelani, who gave the invocation this morning, is inviting us to Lantern Hill, which is a sacred site for both the Mashantucket Pequot and his tribe, the Eastern Pequot. And so that's the way that we're integrating in our confluence, both the work that's happening in this conference, but also doing our localized bioregional gathering, which has included for about a year at this point for the collective, integration and relationship building between the tribes in this area and non-tribal, non-Indigenous folks. And so that's been an ongoing process here in our particular bioregion. So it was kind of fortuitous that Jelani was stepping in right at that moment. Salva, I see that you've got your hand up. So over to you, please.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Lila, for your awesome presentation. It's really nice to listen to you always. I'm from Europe, from Spain. So when I'm looking back to my ancestors, to my indigenous, I have a big problem. Usually because I cannot find, okay, I go back in history, I arrived to the Romans, before the Romans, but in some way, I don't know, in the school, in how I was taught, indigenous, we make a relation with another kind of people, no? Another kind of people. I mean, here in Valencia, I'm from Valencia, from Spain, we have the Detania, no? And the Iberos and all these people. But if I go back again, there is another tribes. Till which point do we have to go back to really sense that these are our ancestors? What do you think about this?
It is a bit tough in Europe because a lot of the knowledge of a lot of the biocultural diversity of Europe was very much assaulted by the Roman Empire and other empires as well. And so it is a little tough. Like imagine California today, right? There used to be 80 languages spoken in California alone. 80. Today, there's mostly just one, and that's English, well, maybe Spanish. And there's a lot of Asian languages in the Asian communities and a few Middle Eastern languages. But of indigenous languages, there are maybe one or two that are still intact, powerfully intact out of 80. So if that could happen to California, it could certainly have happened to Spain. So we're in a bit of a pickle because a lot of the knowledge not only was lost, but the people who knew it was lost are now lost to time. And so what I mean by that is that we have to look in other places. For instance, have you ever been to France? And have you ever been to the cave paintings in France that are 17,000 years old? Have you ever been to Germany and seen the Venus figurine that was found in Germany that is 40,000 years old? When they radiocarbon dated the figurine, she was 40,000 years old. These are the times that I think our spirits are beckoning us to. And I also believe that if you ask the creator a question, he or she or it will help you find the answer. So if you would like to know what your specific indigenous ancestors are, all you have to do is ask. And you will be surprised how the creator starts to show you and reveal to you the secrets of your past through happenstance, through coincidence, in ways that will be undeniable. I did that for myself because although I am Dene, non-Indigenous clan. I know my genealogy as a Dene woman very well because we keep track of it from matrilineal clan systems. But on my European side, my father's side, I didn't know. All I knew was I was white. So I had to dig deeper. Well, who am I? And I found aunties, I found people, and I found out I was Scottish, and I accidentally went back to my homelands even before I found out that that's where my family's family home was. So we have to remember that there's an ancestry.com right in the sky, and that's the creator, or whatever you call it. Doesn't matter. It has many names, but ask it. So that's one thing, to know your own personal culture. Now in Spain, what are the old ancient archaeological sites? Because if you go to France, what is on the wall? Bison. Same kind that my mother's people hunted in America. Not the same kind, but related. Horses. Ibex was really important because they only painted 3 things. It was bison, horses, and ibex. This is 17,000 years ago. People were painting these on the walls in beautiful ways. And I had a little friend with me. He said, Lila, if these people were so stupid, how come they could draw better than us? I was like, he's not lying. I mean, he ain't wrong. I mean, it was like the Mona Lisa of a buffalo, of a bison. And I was like, wow, so beautiful. And so to never underestimate these ancestors or call them primitive or Neolithic or Mesolithic, we have this way of denigrating past humans as if they were stupid cavemen and women. But they actually often have so many secrets. And we know from the lake beds in southern Norway, they analyzed 63 lake beds in southern Norway, and they found that that entire area was managed by the application of routine fire in the same way that the chestnuts were managed. The fire helped to space out the trees. The fire helped to clear traveling for humans and animals. The fire created ashes that nourished the soil and outsprung nutrient-dense grass, which attracted game animals. So it created more and more animals that they could hunt by burning. And the burning also helped to stimulate microbial activity in the soil by continually and periodically injecting the soils with ash, nutrient-dense ash. And so there are many, many secrets about how the past indigenous peoples of Spain cared for the land. And I would say they'd be in the early Holocene. I would look there. And whether you have deep indigenous roots there or not, at the very least, we can honor those practices that they did. So the truth is in there. I won't say it's out there. I'll say it's in there. It's in the soil. It's on the rocks. It's in the land. And we have to put on our scientist hat and figure it out. Thanks. That's a great question, Salva. Jesse, go right ahead.
Yeah. Well, we're mostly talking about success stories, and was originally a physicist and then an architect, and have studied the patterns of design of different things, and including the failure story of modern capitalism, and asking, why does capitalism fail when nature uses growth to create everything too? And what happens when you look at enough examples, you see the pattern that natural growth stimulates new designs, but they're immature and they need to change direction from multiplying their parts to maturing their parts and caring for the world that they enter into, like a child at birth makes that transformation from multiplying to managing, and of course is horribly shocked at first that you really have to do things here. But that's a shock that we all survived, and that we know how to get over, and we see the opportunities come and go in our lives with making relationships and making careers and so forth, and we generally can settle our differences because we can feel the other person's response. You know, to be human is to be kind and generous. But then our societies get stuck in this other thing that they somehow don't see that doubling your take of the environment regularly, which is what growth does. That's what when you have a certain percent growth, it doubles and doubles and doubles. And why don't the people doubling their take of the earth see the conflicts that they're creating? And as we can now see that we're at a limit, and everybody expanding their domains are
Jesse,
stepping on each other's.
Jesse, do you have a question for Lila June?
Yeah. So what could we do to help the people doing the damage understand the damage they're doing? What could we do to give them a view of the world from nature's view?
You know, I was just thinking about this today, actually, and oops, sorry. Can you hear me? Okay. I was thinking, what is the economy of the crabs? Like, if you were to look at the crab community, what does their economy look like? If you put it in those terms to an economist or to a capitalist, and let's say that our economy is let's talk about crab farmers or crab, fishers. What would their economy depends on the crab, right? So what does the crab's economy depend on? So therefore, if I'm a crabber and I collect crabs to sell them at the market, I would have to understand, if I'm smart or remotely intelligent, what is the crab's economy? What do they feed on? And furthermore, what else depends on the crabs for their economy? So I just thought of that the other day, is like, why do we call crab stuff ecology and human stuff economy, when ecology and economy might actually be the same thing? It's just economy is a very anthropocentric version of ecology. And if we can understand human economies, then I bet those same people could probably understand crab economies. How many are there? We know how much algae do they need to eat? How many worms do they need to eat, etc. Well, they're omnivores, but and so that was one. I don't think that answers your question as good as I probably could, but I just thought that was an interesting thought I had today. Like, how do we put it in their terms, And then we find out, whoa, the crab's economy depends on this economy, which depends on this economy, and our economy depends on those economies. And we realize it's an ecology of economies. And so I just found that to be something that I think a capitalist could get his or her head around, is like, okay, I know what an economy is. Can I understand the economy of an apple tree? Can I understand the economy of a chestnut tree? Can I understand the epidemiology of a horse? And so, in other words, being less anthropocentric, but using the same tools. They may be able to make that jump. I don't know. But another great way to get people to care is for their entire system to collapse beneath their feet. Because, as has been said, a thorn of experience can be more helpful than an entire field of advice. And so I think we're going to have to feel the burn sometime soon to actually learn experientially why this system doesn't work. And I'm afraid that may be the only thing that will wake people up. And that will actually be a gift. Even though it might be a hard gift, it'll be a gift. And it's a gift my people have endured before. Indigenous peoples, we didn't just wake up this cool. You know, we had to fall on our faces again and again and again and ruin things and realize, oh my God, that didn't work. Let's do it this way. The Haudenosaunee Great Law of Peace only came about because they were in so much war. And so we've had Creator give us the gift of drought and destroy our whole Chaco Canyon city. And we learned from that hierarchy and slavery, which is we were doing at Chaco Canyon, is not going to work on this planet. Only egalitarianism, only equality works. And so now in our community, all the clans are equal. So I think that may be the way they're going to have to learn too. Thank you, Jesse, for your question. And I can tell, Bill, you want to say something.
Yeah, Lila June, thank you very much for that wonderful response. I particularly like your phrase, ecologies of economies. That's a really great way to phrase it. We are coming to the end of this session and the end of this day. So I'd like to just pause and give appreciation to you, Lila June, for a really wonderful presentation. In particular, honing in this research around millennial scale indigenous regenerative landscape management and social system management into the bioregional context. So thank you, Lila June, for that. And I know that Lila June, you're going to be having a session later this month that will be hosted by the Post Carbon Institute with Samantha Power, who will be speaking tomorrow in this conference, and Brandon Latzinger, who's spoken in one of our open dialogues. So I encourage folks to check that session out as well. Just to round things out here, Ralph is going to present a few things of background information and then get us ready for tomorrow. So again, Lila June, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me and have a great day, everyone.
Yeah, Lila, I was trying to present.
No.
You can't see the content. And that's where the
Jesse, I'm sorry, we're winding things down here, so we're at the hour, so we need to respect people's time. So over to Ralph. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. And really to round things out in just a minute, because it has been a very long day. It is necessary to also make you aware of who has been sponsoring this conference, and also our Confluence fund, so that we were able to also financially support some of our conferences. So thank you to Novo Foundation for the conference sponsorship, and also the Confluencing Fund sponsorship by Lankley Chase. Without that, we wouldn't have dozens of conferences, also partially receiving a bit of money from our r3.0 Confluencing Fund. Just to also let you know, we have created a conference coherence circle around this conference, which is, or it's just taking the conference as a starting point for a broader discussion about how to build more coherence in the bioregional space with the help of these organizations. And that is an ongoing effort that we're going to have also after this conference. And last but not least, we want to also thank our media partner, StoryMoss. They've already done great stuff, and they will collect stories from the conferences and will also present those to us through social media. We will partially also use them on our website. We will have lots of interaction already during. If you look into LinkedIn, you already find the first stories, or then also afterwards, after the conference as well. So that's enough for today. We're at the end of today's program. Thank you very much. This has been, what is it, 6 hours or even 6.5 hours together, which is a lot of time. And we really understand that it needs a bit of stretching and a bit of detoxing for you to digest well what we've heard today, which was an awful lot, and tomorrow will not be different. So with that, I'd like to stop the recording just to let us then say goodbye until tomorrow.